This is Digging for Britain, the programme which brings you this year's most outstanding new archaeology. All year, in hundreds of digs across the UK, teams have been uncovering new archaeological clues which help us to tell our story. Hey! We'll be looking at highlights from all the digs with in-depth analysis from archaeologists who are going to extraordinary lengths to uncover our history in a way that only archaeology can.
And they've been out there filming themselves to make sure that we were there for every moment of discovery.
It's in perfect mint condition.
And they'll be joining us back here at the Dorset County Museum to help us make sense of what the new finds actually mean.
Tonight we're in the west of England as we meet army veterans on the hunt for Anglo-Saxon warriors. We investigate Britain's earliest leprosy hospital, changing what we know about how sufferers might have been treated. And treasure hunters find a 3,000-year-old gold hoard, but with a very unlikely owner. We're in Dorchester, home to the Dorset County Museum, established in 1845, and famous for housing the study and notebooks of one of England's most well-loved writers, Thomas Hardy. But it's also home to some of our most important treasures, like the Chickerell rings, these Bronze Age gold torques discovered by metal detectorists. And the Langton Matravers axes, the largest hoard of Bronze Age axes ever discovered in Britain, and which some believe were made as a gift to the gods. In our first dig, just 50 miles away from the museum, more extraordinary Bronze Age remains are coming to light at Barrow Clump in the heart of Salisbury Plain. Over the last 3 years, archaeologists from the Ministry of Defence, who owns the land, have been excavating a Bronze Age burial site. This ancient site dates back to over 5,000 years ago, but archaeologists have been called in now because it's in danger. Badgers are burrowing through the soil, destroying the archaeology, so the team must hurry to recover and record as much as possible. And after only 2 days on site, their work pays off with an important discovery: a Bronze Age burial urn, so fragile that its temporary protection is a bucket.
There you go. It's really, really exciting, this. You can see the rim of the pot all coming around here, and within it bits of collapsed pot, but all this burnt material, which we presume is burnt human bone. And we'll lift it out as a block and we'll excavate that back in the lab, but it's a fantastic find.
Having gently excavated the urn, osteoarchaeologist Jacqueline McKinley carefully lifts the collar.
Voila! Right, here's the cake. If I lift that up, can you see all that lovely cord decoration on the inside there? Brilliant, isn't it?
No sooner has the first urn been rescued, but a second vessel is found. This much larger urn has been buried upside down.
It is moving then, isn't it? I'm just worried.
After a tense hour, the urn comes out in one piece, carefully bandaged.
It It's actually a food vessel, Bronze Age food vessel, which I know looks like a bandaged head at the moment. The reason that bandage is there is because it's slightly elasticated, so it gives support to the vessel and stops it falling apart while I'm getting things from inside it.
And Jackie, you're in the process of looking at this material, I think from the first urn, the urn with the cord marking on it.
That's right. This was actually quite badly damaged on site. It was only about sort of 10 centimetres left. So I decided in this case to excavate what was inside it on site. And today actually is the first time I've seen this now it's been washed and cleaned up again.
And at this point, what can you tell about this bone?
Well, what I've done is I've pulled out some very useful pieces of bone, like for instance this here, which is part of the supraorbit, which goes about there.
Yeah.
And there's a few other pieces around here, like for instance this one, which is from there, which is part of the zygomatic arch. The skull is very useful, one in that you have very easily identifiable pieces of bone which you only either have one or a pair of. So they're very useful for doing minimum numbers of individuals, but also a lot of the skull is very diagnostic in terms of sexing the individual, the adult individual.
And what about the sex of this individual? Is this an adult male or female?
Looking at the general size and robusticity, I would say it's most likely to be male.
And do you think these were high status individuals that were treated in this way and buried in the barrows?
Status, well, you know, in the past the antiquarians always thought that everybody was a chieftain. It was always chieftains, always men, always chieftains who were buried in here.
So this would have been a king?
It would have been a king, yes, undoubtedly, or a prince or something. But when you actually look at the individuals you find in these places, they are a mix of individuals. You could get males, females, children. And one of the things that I have noticed when I've been looking at material from these barrows is that you have quite a large number of females with infants or young children. Now, if you think about your community and what matters to a community, one of the important things there is the future. And your future is your children. So really, the children and the mother that produces the children, could be seen as very important to the community. So it's not really surprising that they're quite often chosen to be buried in these positions.
But these urns aren't the only things which make this dig special. In a unique project known as Operation Nightingale, the MOD archaeologists are working closely with injured soldiers for whom this is vital therapy. This pioneering scheme is introducing veteran armed forces personnel to the practice of archaeology.
Operation Nightingale is really a recovery opportunity. Some of them will want to, having had maybe a tough operational tour, will want to just come out and experience a very benign atmosphere. You can see how it's quite cathartic in the broadest sense that you can come out here, be with your friends, and just get to understand a little bit about the past landscapes of which you've trained over many years.
For many men, like former rifleman Kenny Kendrick, it's been a lifesaver.
What happened to me is I suffered a mental breakdown while over in Germany, and it's given me a whole new lease of life, a new career. Yeah, I left the army and I've become an archaeologist full time. And once I start digging, it's very hard to stop. If I'm not told when to take a break, when to have a drink, when to have a dinner, then I'll probably dig until it gets dark.
In fact, the disciplines of the military and archaeology are not such strange bedfellows.
Anyone who's watched the news footage from Afghanistan or Iraq has seen people, military figures, looking for IEDs and things like that with a metal detector. Critical skill in the military, key skill on an archaeological site.
Just do that area again.
It's almost a symbiotic relationship in many ways. There are so many crossover skills, and it's quite an inspirational thing for the archaeologists amongst us to see that and working together as a team, and it's a team thing that's crucial.
As its name suggests, Barrow Clump is a barrow or burial mound, so it's no surprise that the team uncovers skeletons.
He was a very large bloke, These femurs are truly huge. And his feet are the toe bones. I've never seen anything so big.
As burial after burial appears, they soon realise they're unearthing an Anglo-Saxon cemetery dating from the 6th century AD, just a few metres away from the original Bronze Age burial site.
There's huge progress on site. We started off with one or two grave cuts that we could see, and over the weeks we've now exposed at least 12. There we go.
Like this spearhead and shield boss, the metal centre of a shield which would have protected the hand. The original shield could have been up to 1 metre in diameter. These are warriors' graves. But with so many on site, the team are beginning to wonder why.
One of the theories that was put forward to me by one of the soldiers on the project was that the outside of the ditch seemed to have quite a large concentration of males with shields, and thought that this was perhaps something like an equivalent in death of the Saxon shield wall protecting those buried inside the monument, which I think is a really lovely idea.
So it is interesting to have all those Anglo-Saxon burials alongside the Bronze Age ones, but is it unusual?
No, there's quite a lot of evidence that Anglo-Saxons would choose what were obvious, important, particularly mortuary important, landscape features in which to bury their own dead. These would have been very obvious features at that time. The mounds would have been quite obvious there, and people would have recognised that they were very important to people in the past. And in a way, the same way as in the Bronze Age, they were probably almost staking a claim in that landscape by producing these mounds. The Anglo-Saxons, by coming in and burying their dead there, may also have been staking a claim to the same land.
Well, in spite of a growing number of warrior graves at Barrier Clump, there's still one thing that's eluding the team.
Chap in front of us has between his knees the remnants of an iron shield boss, and that's one of several we've now had over the site. To the left of the individual, just poking out above the grave, is the socket of a spear. So, all those things that you'd expect perhaps to find with a warrior. What we're missing from that, and something you see referred to throughout Saxon poetry, is a sword.
Swords were prized by the Saxons, but are extremely rare finds. Richard's greatest hope is that they'll find one, but despite unearthing 75 graves, the prize is proving elusive. However, the badgers burrowing on this site have left a trail that leads the team right to this year's prize find.
As we were going down, we had a lot of badger packing material, so we weren't sure whether they would have disturbed any remains that were there. As it happens, we do have a badger run that does run right alongside and has damaged the skeleton, but the rest of it is very well preserved. And we're very lucky in the fact that we've got a sword lying alongside it. So this one's got the big three really, and it's got the spearhead, the shield boss, and then a sword alongside.
Now all they have to do is get the sword out. An extremely delicate task, carried out by Lynn Wootton, conservator with Wessex Archaeology.
It's a sword which is sitting right on the top arm bone, which is coming out in fragments. I'm going to try and get the whole lot up in one go.
If the sword survives excavation, the trick will be to find out if it's pattern welded. This was a complicated method of forging a blade to produce a top-class sword. A clue perhaps to the man who was buried with it.
We're thrilled to be joined by Richard and some of his colleagues from the medical squadron here this evening. And we're especially lucky because we're going to X-ray the sword in real time right here in the museum. But before we do that, Richard, what can you tell us about it?
Well, we're really excited about this because this was the only sword we had. It was found by one of the soldiers of the project, so really, really exciting. And what we really want to know is to see whether it is one of those fabulous high-status weapons that's pattern welded and really part of the whole mythology of Anglo-Saxon England, of the sword with its name and that sort of thing. It's a powerful item.
And this came out of the ground in one piece, didn't it?
It did, and it was a nervous moment having this thing lifted Excalibur-like from the ground.
Somebody take it with 2 hands.
There you go.
It's not touching very well, so
Yeah.
it's... Oh, lots of minerals. Lots of that.
So yeah, it's a real thing of beauty, and the sword being such an important artefact in the 6th century, this was really quite a thrill to find it.
So what we've got, I mean, this is the handle end, obviously, and is there bits of copper along?
That's right, you've got the remnants of the scabbard, and perhaps you can make out little traces of mineralised wood, which is the fabric of the scabbard, and these are the gilded copper alloy mounts at the side of the scabbard. Same with the top area, might have some decorations. The X-ray will hopefully show us that, and then perhaps you can see some elements of the horn handle that was here in its 6th century guise.
So that's been mineralised. So is there an iron core running through the middle
I think
of that
so.
then?
Yeah, that again we'll pick up on the X-ray.
And have you cleaned it up at all, or is this just as it came out of the ground?
This is subject to immediate stabilisation, so it doesn't deteriorate, and then the full conservation will happen after the event.
Brilliant. Well, I think we should probably let Sergeant McDougall and Sergeant Barnett get on with the X-rays. We need to clear while they do that.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. That's come out beautifully, hasn't it, Richard?
It was fantastic, because you can see all the things we really wanted to see. Of course, the thing that you really think of a sword in this period is whether it's pattern welded or not. And that was the real question we wanted to answer. And the answer is yes, it is, which is fantastic.
So how can you tell that?
Can you see all these little sort of zigzags in here? Can you see there's a sort of crisscross element right in the middle of the blade up here? That's really indicative of these 3 bars of iron that have been twisted and twisted to form, well, it's a debate at the moment as to whether that's for strength or for decoration, but it certainly would have been very beautiful, a bit like a herring, one of these fish, a beautiful decorated thing.
And we see that in samurai swords as well.
It's exactly the same thing, because it's a strengthening thing, and you can see how perhaps making out the white lines going down the sword. Can you all see that? See that? That's the actual edge of the sword, where this pattern welding goes on, and then the hardened steel edges are on the side there.
So that's when it starts to bevel out towards the cutting
That's
edge.
right, and so you've got a thing of beauty, but a thing with a real purpose to it. These aren't just prestigious objects for no reason, they're also things that can actually kill.
It's great to be able to see all that without actually having to start taking that sword
It's
off.
fabulous. It's a non-intrusive way of finding an awful lot of data and information about the artefact without rendering it fragile and vulnerable, really.
Okay, so who was the man who had this artefact then?
That's a very good question. He had not only this, he had a shield with him, he had a spear, and he had a knife. So he's got more or less the panoply of arms going into the grave. He's right in the most important part of the burial mound, so he must have been somebody with a degree of power and wealth. This isn't an everyday item. As I said, it's the only one we've had out of the 75 burials. So he's an important man.
The soldiers believe that the owner of this sword might have been a local king or warrior chief who was buried surrounded by the burials of other warriors and placed in the ground with his spear, shield and sword. This find, close to a Bronze Age cemetery, contributes both to our understanding of Anglo-Saxon burials and shows how they reused earlier monuments for their cemeteries. But there's another group of warrior dead here at the Dorset Museum who are central to a long-running debate. For years, historians have argued whether the Romans invaded Britain or staged a peaceful takeover. So Rebecca, Maiden Castle is famous because it's a really beautiful hill fort, but also for the cemetery that's up there.
Exactly. There is what has become known as the Wall Cemetery at the eastern end of the hill fort, yeah.
And these are two of the skeletons from that cemetery.
Yeah, these two are very, very special young chaps because they are the ones that contain the most unique evidence that we have that enables us to pin this cemetery down to AD 43.
So let's have a look at these two then. I mean, I can immediately see something which looks a bit suspicious.
Yes.
Which is, and it's got an arrow pointing to it as well.
I know, it's very helpful.
Which is this, this bolt here. Oh, I'm just going to move this vertebra out so that we can have a good look at it. Look at that! Well, that's amazing.
It is, I mean, and it's actually embedded into the bone, so it's passed through that individual and lodged in their vertebra.
Is that a typical Roman weapon there?
It is. It's a classic Roman ballista bolt, and that's how we can date these burials. So we know that although the individuals, the pottery that they're buried with is late Iron Age, that absolutely dates them to the Roman invasion because none of those weapons are here before the Romans get here.
So it's coming in like this, right through the guts, through the kidney, in fact, and grazing the vertebra and coming right to the back here. So that's enough to kill somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is more. So very obviously, this young chap here has got a rather large hole in his head. So that's where he's been bashed on the head. Yeah. And then these lines, you only get the fracture lines running off in these directions if it's something that's happened at the time of death. And then it kind of gets worse for this guy because then this very little nick here, and that's out of the back of his mandible. And that's where someone with a sword then tried to cut his head off.
Right, okay.
And then they've had another go because he's then got this blow which has actually peeled off the bone on his mandible here.
Nasty.
Yeah, so they've tried to cut his head off twice.
It's really been hacked, hasn't he? I mean, this is vicious, this is violent, and it's not...
Yeah.
It's not just one piece of evidence of violence. I mean, shock and awe at its worst.
It is very, very shocking. So the Roman army are going above and beyond what is necessary to kill someone. But we know that when they are conquering new territories, they really did go and decimate people.
These skeletons graphically reveal one side of the story of the Romans' arrival in Britain, but in 2011 I visited a site in North Dorset which told a different story, the Durotriges Big Dig project. For several years, archaeologists have been digging at Winterbourne, Kingston. The dig originally started as an Iron Age exploration, looking back almost 2,000 years to when members of the Durotriges tribe lived and farmed here before the Romans arrived.
Well, this survey of the site, which is a magnetic survey, shows us the Iron Age ditched enclosure we call the banjo enclosure. That's because it superficially resembles a banjo with the body and the neck.
And do you think this was a defensive enclosure?
Not at all. Not at all. This is effectively an undefended farmstead.
But as the team continued the dig, they started to turn up more and more signs of Romanisation influencing the lives of the local inhabitants.
So we've also got pieces of chicken, and of course, we're familiar with chicken today, but in the late Iron Age, this is an exotic animal. This is coming in from the Roman world. Presumably they're selling their produce, they're selling their grain, and they're getting these kind of luxury food items in return. This particular fragment is the handle of an amphora, a large sort of storage vessel that would have stood up to the height of an adult. And we can tell by the fabric and by the shape that it's from Spain, and it would have probably held wine.
That's lovely.
It is, so we can imagine it, they're eating chicken, they're drinking wine, they're sort of plugged into the Mediterranean world.
So for these Iron Age farmers, life with the Romans appears to have been a peaceful coexistence, in stark contrast to the massacre at Maiden Castle. You don't see evidence of a abrupt transition at your side, do you?
No, I mean, you can't really tell when the Romans arrived, because there's small amounts of Roman material coming in the 1st century BC. As we go on to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century AD, there's still equivalent amounts of Roman pottery. It's all very low-level stuff. There's no sudden break when the Romans arrived. There's no change, there's no dramatic increase in Roman artefacts, and we're seeing that right the way across Dorset. I think, like Native American societies, they're picking and choosing a few things that help facilitate their lifestyle, but there's no major change in settlement or religion going on. It takes 300 years after the invasion before we start seeing real significant Roman material like villas and temples being created. There's a big time lag between the arrival of the Romans and their final sort of evolution of Roman culture.
I think the main thing is that the picture that we're used to is too simple, isn't it? It's much more complex.
It is. You get this black and white idea. The Romans arrive, those who they don't kill end up living in villas and towns straight away. It takes 3 centuries for that kind of Roman culture to really take a hold in this part of Britain.
So you've been digging at this site now, Miles, for quite a few seasons. How's the picture been changing over the years?
It's been changing quite a lot, because we started out with an Iron Age settlement. We're looking at that transition from Iron Age to Roman, and what we're finding is evidence going on a good sort of 3 centuries afterwards. So we're doing a geophysical survey around the whole area, but we're finding more evidence of later Roman material.
And I think a couple of your more plucky students filmed this year's dig for us, didn't they?
Absolutely,
as it unfolded.
Yeah. Day 3 in Trench 1 at the top end of the site, and the cleaning back has revealed exactly what we were hoping to find, really, which is we've got this very sort of large, it's about 15 metres across, square enclosure, defined by a very sort of thin ditch, and the interior of which there's a whole series of small pits and other features. It could be a shrine, it could be a temple, it could be none of the above, it could be some kind of animal agricultural enclosure, but until we start going down into it, we're not going to know. But it's a very nice, distinct feature, and it fits beautifully in the trench. And once again, because it's dug down in the chalk, it shows up fantastically.
Miles and his students are hoping that this find will yield clues about the people who lived here. Were they farmers who adopted Roman ways, or were they Romans from elsewhere in the empire?
Okay, so it's the beginning of day 7, and we're quite excited that inside the square enclosure in Trench 1, there's 4 rectangular cuts which seem like graves.
This is the team's first major clue as to who might have lived here.
So we just started cleaning up these rectangular cuts, and they have actually, thankfully, started turning up into graves. We were wondering to begin with, because these were east-west aligned, whether they were going to turn out to be Christian burials. But the heads are at the eastern end. If they were Christian, you expect them to be at the other end, so facing sunrise on the Day of Judgment. We've got a skull coming up here, and we've also got just half of a pottery vessel coming up at the other end.
So these are unlikely to be Christian graves, and neither do they appear to be Iron Age, as in this area, those tend to take the form of a crouched burial. The expectation is that they are Roman, because in 2013, just in the next field, they excavated a late 4th century Roman villa. After another day's digging, the team begin to find strong evidence of a connection as more skeletons start to appear.
You can see just here in this particular grave, we've only got one coffin now coming up here, so we know that these individuals are all in coffins, which is probably another indicator that they're not early Christian, which tend to be buried in shrouds. But we've also got a spindle well, which is another little object they're taking with them into the afterlife. And quite a lot of late Roman female burials have spindle wells buried with them, whether that's an activity they would have done in life. And one of the other cuts that's been excavated, we've had hobnails coming up, little nails hammered into sandals and Roman footwear, suggesting that they're going into the grave where
wearing almost military-style boots. So at the moment we can say that these are Roman, they're almost certainly late Roman, and the provisional evidence at present suggests they are contemporary with the villa, which is what we're hoping for, to try and find a link with villa occupants and the house they actually occupied.
Just a day later, Miles and the team uncover 3 female and 2 male skeletons.
It's the end of day 9. Things are going extremely well. The square barrow in-trench one is turning out rapidly to become what appears to be a family mausoleum. We've now got at least 5 graves in there. What looks like 1 immature, 1 sort of juvenile character, and 4 adults. None of which appear to be Christian, all of which at the moment seem to have indication of grave goods.
It was traditional for Romans to bury goods with their dead, like footwear or pottery. Like this bowl they found in one of the female graves.
Hopefully we'll start to get all those out and get a better idea of their date, still hoping that they are the occupiers of the villa that we excavated last year.
If they can get an accurate date for the pot, it will give the team an even better idea of who these people were.
So Miles, when do these burials that you've just been finding date to?
Well, that's the question. The pot that comes out with them, this particular vessel, we know is made sometime about 370, 380 AD. But the question is, how old is it at the time it's gone into the grave?
Oh, that's lovely. It's got imprinted pattern on it.
It's got this little rosette pattern all the way around. But you can see it's very worn. The slip's worn off, and it originally had a base. It has had a foot on it, which is broken off, and it's been worn smooth. And given it may have taken 40, 50, 60 years before it's actually ended up in the grave. So we're seeing people who've been buried in a Roman-style tradition, but they haven't got access to high-status Roman goods. I suspect, given that we've only got a few spindle whorls, we've got fragments of pottery, there's not a lot of Roman status goods going in with these graves. I think we're dealing with a sub-Roman population. This is the people who are sort of traditionally grubbing around in the remains of their Roman world.
So do you think this is after the collapse of the Roman Empire then?
I think it is. I think we are dealing with the last people who are still have a remembrance of a Roman world. They're still clinging on to 1 or 2 items that link them back to that past, but they're no longer working within a functioning Roman administration. So I think we're really dealing with people who are probably dying and being buried probably sometime in the sort of mid 5th century, so we've probably got 450s AD. It's probably our cut-off point for the time that these people are going into their graves.
And there is a theory that the bodies at Maiden Castle are the natives who are taking one last stand against the Romans. And is it possible that the bodies you've got and you're excavating are their descendants hundreds of years later?
That would be fantastic if we could prove that, obviously. But if we got good DNA samples from both, then we might be able to say that these are the descendants from the Iron Age inhabitants. And that would be something rather spectacular, because we still don't know yet whether it's the people who live in the villas are the descendants of the indigenous population, or whether they are first generation or second generation migrants from another part of the Roman Empire.
The Romano-Britons who lived and died in the villa offer clues to the poverty of the Twilight world after the Roman army left in 410 AD. But less than 100 miles away at Chedworth, another dig is unexpectedly revealing the glories of Roman Britain in its heyday. First discovered by the Victorians 150 years ago, Chedworth is a late 4th century courtyard villa complex. In August, a team of archaeologists from the National Trust started a 2-week dig to find out more about the villa layout. Unfortunately, they had very little recorded information to go on. The last person to dig here was Sir Ian Richmond, Professor of Archaeology at Oxford University, whose notes were lost after his death in 1965. all that remains of his work are some modern concrete path borders which the team believe Richmond laid down to outline a 2nd century Roman bathhouse. But they were in for a surprise, as Martin Papworth explains.
When we started our excavation here, we really thought that Ian Richmond had dug everything, including the wall lines where he put his concrete, and also the bits in between, which we call the islands. So we were quite surprised when we lifted the turf, and we found bits of tesserae coming up, bits of mosaic coming up, and there were no records of any mosaics in any of these areas between the walls.
The tesserae, or tile pieces, are revealing what might be a border in red, cream and blue, but whether anything else survives of the central pattern is unclear.
There are areas, there are going to be big holes in it. There's going to be areas where the mosaic will be lost, and Carol's working over here. She's got an edge against the wall, but lots of loose tesserae there in a worn area away from the wall. So we just need to gradually uncover it and show what lies within these walls.
There's also something else puzzling the team. They had thought they were working on a series of baths in separate rooms.
The other strange thing is that we've taken the concrete up and we've cleaned underneath the concrete and we're not finding walls yet, which is quite peculiar.
Pretty soon it becomes clear they're no longer dealing with a bathhouse.
We knew from the beginning, when we first lifted the turf, that there was going to be mosaic underneath here. But now we can see it's part of one great long mosaic. In fact, we now believe it's part of the grand reception hall of the villa. So rather than having 5 or 6 little bits of different rooms of mosaic, all this mosaic joins up into one big pattern.
The team make other finds which give more of an idea of the decoration of the villa.
We found bits of broadplaster on top of the topsoil, and in that we've got patterns in red, blue and white, green, and so we must think of this floor as being part of something really grand.
Emerging from the rubble, an extraordinary, huge artwork and an insight into the wealth and power of the Romano-British.
So if we were looking at in terms of, did this person consider themselves Roman? Were they presenting their life as being part of the great Roman Empire and the whole link to classical civilization? Well, there surely must be someone really showing off their wealth and their link to Rome and really presenting themselves as Roman.
The team had started the dig thinking they were looking for a 2nd century bathhouse, and they finished up with a show-stopping grand reception hall.
I think it's amazing how much you can find by going back and revisiting existing archaeological sites where you think you know everything already.
Yeah, and find some incredible mosaics. John, how do those mosaics compare to these incredible mosaics that we're literally sitting on right here?
Well, we're very lucky in Dorset that we have an awful lot of mosaics. Over 60 have been found in the county, but in the county museum here we have 12 that have been relocated from around the county, including this one from Derngate Street in the middle of Dorchester.
And what have we got here? I mean, is that a serpent over there?
Yeah, we've got serpents and we've got drinking vessels. The serpents represent rebirth, and that's Bacchus's drinking vessel, so it's good luck and celebration.
So what can these mosaics tell us about the people who owned them, or who owned the villas where they were?
Well, the complexity of them and their intricacy suggests they were extremely wealthy. Also, there are things in them that tell us that they want to be part of the wider Roman culture. Their use of mythology, their imagery for the Roman gods and legends all suggests that they really want to identify with Rome.
So were they locals made good, or were they Roman officials who'd moved in?
Well, that's going to be the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think my own instinct would be it's going to be a combination of the local population who have done well from Roman occupation, from trading with the Romans, and also those officials from Rome who want very grand houses. in what was a very important part of Roman Britain.
So these beautiful and intricate mosaics tell us of a vanished Romano-British world when at least some in the West enjoyed the riches of empire.
For the past 7 years, a team has been excavating one of the earliest leprosy hospitals near Winchester, dating back almost 1,000 years. And what they've been finding at St Mary Magdalene is really helping to change our ideas about leprosy in the Middle Ages.
Just a mile from Winchester city centre, St Mary Magdalene was once a busy complex of buildings, but now nothing remains above ground. The last recorded medieval building on this site was a late 15th century almshouse. But archaeologists from the University of Winchester have been slowly peeling back an extremely rare medical history. As the dig unfolds, the team is filming it themselves, and in charge is Chief Investigator Simon Roffey.
The north wall of that infirmary running across the site, so I'm inside the medieval infirmary now, and as I step outside into this area here, we have evidence of what we think may be the wall of a possible cloister. Last year we found whole pots, metal objects, evidence for medical practice.
But more importantly, the team have uncovered 20 graves. The condition of the skeletons leads them to believe that there was a leprosy hospital here, dating back to 1070.
It's the earliest excavated leprosy hospital in Britain. The cemetery holds about 85% of individuals with leprosy, men, women, children and babies. It's the highest sample we have from any British site.
In the Middle Ages, it was thought that those with leprosy were unclean and sinful, and that the disease was a punishment from God. In 2011, I went to look at the skeletons they'd uncovered for myself and see the full shocking extent of the disease with osteologist Dr. Katie Tucker.
Now this is extreme, isn't it?
Yeah, this is, I suppose you, don't know if it's the wrong word to use, the best example of leprosy that we have on the site. Yeah, you can see the massive amounts of bone loss.
Yeah.
I mean, totally lost the front of the nose. You actually see these are the sockets here for the first molars, so all the bone has been lost back to the first molars.
That is just horrific, isn't it? I mean, look at that. You've lost all of the front of the upper jaw here, and the bottom of the nasal cavity,
and the hard palate, of course, has gone as well.
Yeah.
So it probably would have been quite difficult for this individual to eat without choking.
Yeah. It's quite a shocking disease, isn't it? I mean, I find it shocking to look at it in a skeleton, and I think it's not surprising that it carried such a stigma with it.
I mean, they would have looked alien, really, especially with the facial lesions as well in the soft tissue, and probably would have needed help eating maybe because. Well, they may have even had difficulty actually picking things up because they'd started to get loss of feeling in their hands.
Yeah.
So I think they probably would have needed quite a lot of help during the last few years of their life.
Some accounts suggest that those suffering from leprosy would have been outcasts and not given the same treatment as ordinary citizens in life or in death. But back at St Mary Magdalene, the team believes that the graves themselves reveal a very different story.
What we can see here is a grave that's been well cut into the chalk, anthropomorphic, it's tapered down towards the feet end. There's a head niche there to hold the head of the individual, and around the grave you can see the lip which would hold a lid or a ledger on top of it. You can see that all these graves are well separated, they've been marked as well. So what we're seeing here is a certain level of care and attention that's gone into building these graves.
It's clear that these were no hasty burials. In this religious hospital, people with leprosy seem to have been treated with respect and buried with care. The archaeologists also believe that one particular grave they uncovered back in 2011 supports this idea. This skeleton of a man was discovered buried with a scallop shell, a traditional pilgrim badge that he may have carried back from one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in the world, Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Simon believes that this man proves that medieval leprosy sufferers could be treated with respect and dignity, and not always with revulsion.
This is the shell that we just saw in the VT, the Pilgrim's Shell.
That's right. This wonderful artefact was from an individual of mature years. He had early stage leprosy. Clearly took this with him to the grave as a sort of way of proving that he'd done this arduous pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. But I think more widely this badge tells us about the status of the hospital. I mean, here is a man of religious sensitivity, wealth perhaps, and the means to go on a pilgrimage, and here he is buried in a community of leprosy sufferers. So this really challenges this view that we have that leprosy hospitals were somehow excluded from society, the community were outcast, this sort of thing.
But do you think he could have been excluded when he developed the outward signs of leprosy? I mean, he's there in the hospital, he's buried within the hospital cemetery and not with his own community.
I think when we look at the archaeology as a whole, what we have is well-appointed timber buildings originally, substantial post holes on the site, we have a chapel, we have a well-ordered cemetery. We also got evidence for medical provision on one example. All this put together, I think, tells us that this site wasn't a site of outcasts. These were people who had a certain level of status, I think.
Because there is the traditional view, the medieval view, that leprosy was somehow a sinful disease, but this doesn't appear to be the case.
It's a very complex issue, I think, where we have this perhaps belief today that leprosy sufferers were sinful, were outcasts. This has only recently been challenged by certain revisionist historians and also our work at St Mary Magdalene in Winchester.
So it's really important then, because it's showing that these people were looked after.
Certainly, and leprosy is a disease that affects people today in places such as India and Brazil, among many other countries. There's only about 250,000 new cases of leprosy identified every year. And leprosy is still stigmatised in these countries. So part of what we're doing is really challenging this stigma.
There are many dark ages in archaeology, periods when we're trying to piece together the story from fragmentary evidence. And because of the nature of that evidence, we often find ourselves focusing on adults. Children are conspicuous by their absence. But now a unique find from the English-Welsh border provides us with a precious connection with a Bronze Age child.
Every year, some archaeological finds are turned up by amateurs armed with metal detectors. On November the 9th, 2013, in a pit near the Forest of Dean, two metal detectorists, Lee Todd and Steve Moody, joyfully unearthed a group of Bronze Age bracelets. The bracelets were then sent to the headquarters of the Portable Antiquities Scheme at the British Museum for investigation. This year, Dr. Neil Wilkin and his team are trying to solve the mystery of this hoard.
The first set are two bracelets wrapped inside one another, or nested as we would say. These have been crumpled probably after they've been deposited, but one side is still beautifully intact, and they've been very carefully decorated. The second set is even fresher. Still has its plug of soil within the centre, but there's nothing inside the soil. We've done an X-ray to make sure. This again is two bracelets that have been wrapped inside one another. Both bracelets have been cut or trimmed on one side to remove the terminal, so they couldn't be used again. And we can see that on the outermost bracelet here. The goldsmith or worker who produced these bracelets was working as part of a long tradition of gold production that stretched back several hundred years before these bracelets were deposited.
But this hoard contains something exceptionally rare.
A third set of bracelets, which are by far the most spectacular. But what's absolutely fantastic and unique about this set is just how small they are. You can really see it against my hand that these could not have been worn by an adult. This little offering, a little bundle of joy, if you like, seems to belong to a very small individual. These must have been worn, if they were worn at all, by a small child or an infant.
There's very little evidence of what it was like to be a child 3,000 years ago. And Neil believes that all the evidence here points to these bracelets belonging to a very important youngster.
We see so little of what it's like to be a child in the Bronze Age and how society is even structured. We see very few houses in everyday life. But the fact that a child or an infant was able to wear these gold ornaments does suggest that they inherited their status, that it was passed from parents and adults to children, rather than something that they earned in the course of life. And that tells us quite a lot about how society may have been structured and how status may have been acquired.
This child's bracelets, small as they are, help us to understand the bigger picture about society 3,000 years ago. And back in Dorchester, there are some matching clues. A precious hoard found near Chesil Beach in 2010 in the grave of a teenage girl.
In the end of the Iron Age, particularly in Dorset, it was common to bury some of your very finest things that you wanted to take with you to the next world as part of your burial. So we've got these very wonderful beads.
Wow, what are they made of?
They're made of glass, and actually they're of types that have not been seen in Britain before from this period, because they're thought to have come from North Africa.
Wow.
So the trade links and the connections are really mind-blowing, I think, in terms of where these people were trading with and connected with.
And what's this? Is this a bracelet or an ornament?
It is I think of it as like a bangle. Reminds me of the sort of cheap bangles kids had when I was a teenager.
Probably not cheap in the Iron Age, though.
Definitely not cheap in the Iron Age. She's also got her tweezers, which are very, very fragile, and this sort of thistle-style brooch. So some really interesting things. Probably her finest pieces of jewellery.
So what's this here? It looks very intricately decorated.
Well, this is, I think, the most wonderful thing. This is a bronze mirror buried across her heart, so it's a very precious object to her.
That's the back of it we're looking at.
That's the back of it. The other side, if I just flip over, you can see is smooth. It's obviously very corroded now and been conserved, but would have been polished bright to take the reflection.
So anyone owning a mirror like this, would they have been seen to have special status or something like that?
I think as a young girl, she was probably from an extremely high status family, but the Romans thought that mirrors had magical powers. They used to cover them because they thought that if you saw the reflection without meaning to, it would be harmful. So the self-image is very important in these times.
It's amazing that we can get a glimpse into a teenager's life from the Iron Age.
I think so, and I like this for the fact that it's not really that different from how a teenage girl might be today, with got tweezers and bangles and beads and mirrors, and that these are still important things in a teenage girl's life, and they were in the Iron Age as well, quite clearly.
These Iron Age trinkets, possibly belonging to a chieftain's daughter, remind us of a Britain before the Romans arrived, back where we began this programme. But this year's digs have thrown up one last twist in the complex tale of the west of Britain.
For the Romans, the far west was frontier country, and in the past we believed that they got no further than Exeter, but a dig at Ipplepen in Devon is literally pushing the boundaries of Roman Britain in the west.
I visited this site 3 years ago when it was just a tiny collection of graves and a Roman road. Now it's turning into something much more intriguing.
It looks like it's an adult female. You can see it's got quite a high straight forehead, which is a feature on females, and quite small arches you can feel on yourself here. You've got quite low ridges and ridge. So I think it's an adult female. Got half of the mandible here, which is this part. We've got this side and all of her teeth, and you can see they're very worn. So all the enamel has actually come off, and we've got the dentine exposed.
The team finds no evidence of the cause of death in this skeleton, but this woman was probably about 30 years old when she died. After some careful excavation, the first Ipplepen resident is off to the University of Exeter for radiocarbon dating.
So it's the end of day 8 and kind of quite an emotional moment, lifting the first skull of the site, and always got to remember you've got to be really respectful that these people were real human beings. It's just quite amazing to think that they lived here on this site 2,000 years ago, and how different the world must have been then.
By day 12, the team have uncovered another 9 burials and over 2,000 small finds, all adding evidence to their theory that this was a Roman settlement, although some of the objects are a bit of a mystery.
Got quite an interesting find here. Not sure exactly what it is, but I've got a feeling that it might be a cosmetic case with makeup inside. We immediately wrapped it in bandages and packaged it up to be conserved and looked at, so we'll know more at a later date exactly precisely what it is.
But what's perhaps the team's biggest clue to a Roman presence is the position of the graves.
Even though it's partially cut into the edge of the road, it is still respecting, generally, the line of the road. It's a roadside burial. It's deliberately placed at the side of the road.
As burials were forbidden in Roman cities, the dead were buried on the outskirts, often along the roadside, just as the team is finding here.
So it's day 18 on our excavations at Ipplepen. We've now got a total of 16 skeletons. So it's quite clear that what we're dealing with here is a Romano-British cemetery, which is very exciting.
It's amazing to see the way this site is developing, because when I visited and we stood on that hill in Ipplepen, all there was a road and a couple of roadside burials, and now you've got a whole cemetery. But what about the road itself? Where does it go?
Don't know yet. I suspect probably from Exeter and out towards South Devon, but it's just really fascinating. We really didn't expect to find such a well-preserved Roman road so far west of Exeter, and we're still only scratching the surface, but this year's excavations have been a real revelation. They really have, and it was just an example of some of the absolutely lovely stuff that we had. This is what was being excavated in VT.
And is it a powder compact?
We don't know.
Still don't know, come on.
This is a real mystery artefact, actually. Experts have looked at it at the British Museum, and there's a possibility that it might be a lead weight that's been set into a case, into a copper alloy case. But I'm not sure why you would do that, unless perhaps it was a weight that maybe belonged to your grandfather and it was a kind of keepsake or something. So the jury's still out on this mystery artefact. We had hoped that it would be a lady's compact, because it's really nice to actually see the female side of Roman Britain.
Yeah. And a beautiful brooch.
A beautiful brooch. And you can see here it's got amazing enamel set into the cells there, and it's even intact with its catch plate and its pin and its spring. I mean, it's such a lovely example, which dates from probably about 75 to 175 AD.
Is that a tiny bead there?
Yeah, we've got beads, we've got coins, we've got hairpins, we've got mystery objects.
And Danny, you came in to our studio here in Dorchester Museum, incredibly exciting. You told us you've got a radiocarbon date.
Yes, and we took the latest burial, which is dug into the roadside ditch of the Roman road, so it's the latest one that we've excavated so far, and the radiocarbon results that have come back as 7th to 8th century.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's a long-running cemetery then?
Absolutely, yeah, it's just absolutely stunning. So we're not just dealing with 1st century Roman stuff going through to the 4th century Romano British. It's carrying on well into the post-Roman period, and this is so important for Devon and Cornwall.
That is fascinating, and just remember that you heard it here first. We are rewriting the history of the Romans and the Dark Ages in the southwest here on Digging for Britain.
From the Saxon warrior's magnificent sword to the prized possession of a Bronze Age child, the West has provided us with a richly woven tapestry of our past.
What were your favourites?
Well, I think it's two grave goods stood out for me. The first was that Roman bowl, which had been buried after a time when we think the Romans had left and looked after for 60, 70 years and then placed in a grave. And also the pilgrim's shell, travelled all the way to Spain, all the way back again, and ended up here, buried in the hospital. And what were the highlights for you, Alice?
Well, I'm really intrigued by the story of what happened exactly when the Romans arrived here in the West, because on the one hand we have that slaughter at Maiden Castle, incontrovertible evidence of extreme violence, and then on the other hand a much calmer transition at Miles Russell's site, the Rodriguez Big Dig site. So that's fascinating. Well, it's been a marvellous year for our archaeologists here in the West. Good luck to them for next year, but for tonight it's good night from him.
And it's good night from her.
A dip into the BBC archives in search of history's most beautiful woman as we get a Time Watch guide to Cleopatra with Vanessa Collingridge. That's here on BBC4 next.